Hi, I'm Lady Luv, and this is Lady Luv's Books. Okay, corny intro done. Welcome back to my channel. Normally, this is not my type of content, but I figured I read so much every month. Why don't I share my thoughts on some of the books that I've read? My primary reading tool is the Luvvie app. Fabulous Luvvie app, you can see here. It's great. It's connected to my public library, so that gives me access to as many audiobooks and regular books, magazines, movies, full gamut, everything. I love the Luvvie app. It is dope. And it also really shows me how much I don't know, is overreading a trauma response? Anyways, I wanted to share some of the books I read this month. So let's get started. Oh, ooh, okay. I did say I read a lot. I didn't say I had good taste. Sorry. My taste can be questionable sometimes. First book that I read, you can see. I'm so sorry. It's embarrassing. Julia Quinn's On the Way to the Wedding. It's the final book in the Bridgerton series of books. I wanted to read all of the books before I got into Bridgerton. I love a good romancy, trashy period piece novel. And she's written plenty of these books. This one was the final one, so it was about the youngest brother, what's his face? These are gonna be top-notch reviews, BT dubs. Gregory. So Gregory kind of has a love at first sight moment with a friend of a friend. And then when he realizes, no, that's not the one that I actually love. I love her best friend. But then he finds out that she's being blackmailed and has to marry someone else in order to pay off some sort of like debt or whatever. It's very dramatic. This one had a little bit less working in it than normal. But you know, one of those mind cleansing reads. Definitely would recommend, but it would only make sense in the context of the other Bridgerton books. Of all of the Bridgerton books that I've read, this one falls at like number 3. Okay, next book that I read. Can you see it? Elizabeth Acevedo's Clap When You Land. I love this one. This was a great storyline. Starts off super dramatic. A man dies in a plane crash on his way to the Dominican Republic. And what he leaves behind is like a whole family mess. He has one family in New York and one family in the DR. They didn't know about each other, and so they have to meet at the funeral and decide money and stuff. It's so well written. It shows like the hardships of Caribbean life in some countries. It's dramatic, but it's so well written, and you're rooting for the characters, the protagonists in this story. I loved it. It was from a young girl's perspective, a girl of color, and it was about Caribbean life. Loved it. Definitely would recommend reading it. And it has a really wonderful ending to it as well. Next book that I finished was on January 4th. Oh, yes, this was it. I have always been a fan of Cicely Tyson. I think she is one of the most integral artists within the Black community in the last 100 years. This woman almost lived to 100 years old. And so her memoir was packed with amazing stories. She talks about her relationship with Miles Davis. She talks about the fact that even though she was in New York, she never strayed from her craft. She always was like, I'm an artist, I'm a stage performer, I'm an actress. And she threw herself 100% into this craft. That was not one of those lucrative type of things. And it's amazing. The whole story was beautiful. You got glimpses of New York, civil rights movement in the 60s, how active she was involved in it, and how active so many actors within that time period were involved in the civil rights movement. So wonderful, wonderful, wonderful memoir. Chef's kiss, would recommend highly. Next book was Exciting Times by, forgive me, Naoise Dolan? I'm sure that's not right. She's Irish. So it's probably like nosy. No. Hold on.
Exciting Times. A novel by Naoise Dolan.
Naoise Dolan. Exciting Times. Not really. The book was very reminiscent of a Sally Rooney style book. Contemporary Irish literature. Has got me like depressed. I don't know. This one is a story about a girl. What's her face? Quality reviews here. Hold on. Ava. Okay, so Ava moves to Hong Kong to become an English teacher, and everything just seems very like blasé. Like all of her decisions were just very, okay, you know, I'm moving to Hong Kong. There was no sort of like passion or desire to actually be there. She just left and moved there. And she meets up with this guy, Julian, who's a banker, moves in with him like shortly afterwards, but there's no connection. They clearly are not in the same circles. They don't even really express like or dislike for each other. They start talking. Wait, I have to use better words. They start doing the nasty, and it's all very like nonchalant, blasé. He has issues with like some of his family members and whatever, but like it's just very shallow in description. Everybody seems very shallow. He goes away. She meets a girl and like falls in love as best as you can describe love for her. And it really just kind of fizzles from there. The end is a little dramatic and kind of ambiguous. You don't really know what happens, but didn't love this book. I think I would be impressed with it if I hadn't read like Sally Rooney's sort of books as well before. Exciting Times, not so exciting. Next book, Paul Jarvis's Company of One. I could barely get through this book. It was really pretentious. Because I'm like a small business owner, I thought this book would be of some help. It wasn't. It didn't say anything new, and it came from a really privileged perspective. So pass on Paul Jarvis's Company of One. Oh, focus. Next book was Taylor Jenkins Reid, Maybe in Another Life. You know what? I like this one. Hannah moves back to her hometown. I think it's LA, somewhere in California. And within the first week, or the first 5 days she gets there, she gets into this like car accident where she's paralyzed. Plot twist. Then it switches over to another timeline where she's not paralyzed and she's returned to California to sort of start her life again. And it basically, the book was switching between multiple timelines and multiple scenarios, sort of what if scenarios for Hannah. So you actually don't know which was the real storyline. The what if the accident didn't happen? What if the accident did happen? What would Hannah's life look like if all these three different scenarios took place? It was really well written because it was like almost like a choose your own adventure. Yeah, I'm showing my age. Doesn't matter. But it was like a really great way to sort of demonstrate that even if the what ifs you ask yourself, what if occurs, there will still be tragedy, there'll still be sadness, there'll still be loss and grief. But she does have a magical Negro friend in this one. That seems to be the theme of a lot of books these days. But definitely a lovely friendship between her best friend and herself, spanning any of the timelines or any of the scenarios or possibilities that could occur within their friendship. So I definitely would recommend this book. It's a great read. Also, Taylor Jenkins Reid is a fabulous writer. If you read Daisy and the Six, this is very different than Daisy and the Six, but her writing style is chef's kiss. Love it. Laziness Does Not Exist by Devon Price. So this is a nonfiction book. This is a book about dispelling the myth of laziness and really emphasizing that we as a culture, we need more rest, and rest does not equate laziness. We do need more sleep, and the concept of laziness isn't really something that is rooted in fact. I don't know really who this book was for. It felt very academic. I'm not sure. Yeah, I couldn't really decipher like who is supposed to read this. Is it the lazy person who reads this book to just sort of feel affirmed that they're not lazy? Like who is this for? But it is not a terrible read. It does back up a lot of the statements with science and some neuroscience and whatever, but if you don't read it, you won't miss out on life. Luvvie Ajayi Jones, The Professional Troublemaker. That was the next book that was read. I like Luvvie as a character. Love her name. She has, a platform on the internet. She's pretty successful. But this book felt like a dedication to her grandmother rather than like a memoir or sort of like a how to stay motivated and whatnot. I did like her message of sort of, if you believe in something strongly, stand in it. That was the main takeaway I took from this book. It's an easy read. So yeah, if you like Luvvie as a person, and this is basically just her tribute to her grandmother, but it is not really a self-help book in the traditional sense. Next book, can you see? Oops, is it in focus? Lord of mercy. Lord of mercy. Why is no one talking about this? By Patricia Lockwood. People had mixed reviews about this book. I actually like this book. It reminded me of when Pattern Recognition came out, and that book was so contemporary. It was so in the now. It was talking about the concept of viral before viral came out. That's what Pattern Recognition did. And so for a lot of people, if they were not up on what was happening online or offline, they would be kind of confused. This book had that same kind of very contemporary energy. If you don't spend a lot of time on Twitter, on TikTok, or on social media platforms, and you're not sort of up to date on the weirdest sort of stories and pop culture events that are taking place, the first part of this book will read like gibberish. But it's really funny. Like, she'll put in one sentence, I'm like, oh yeah, I know what that story was from. And it's not from like 3 to 5 years ago. It's like very, very much now. And then the book takes like a twist, because then you step out of the sort of internet world that this character is constantly referencing in the beginning parts of the book to her actual world, where her sister is pregnant with a child who has like a terminal disability. No, how do you say this? A child who will have a physical ailment that they might not survive out of the womb. I think that's a proper way to say it. And so this story, when it does twist, it feels like it's another book entirely, but I definitely recommend it because it was well written. She's a great writer. And the first part just feels very contemporary, and the second part just feels it's sad because her sister is pregnant with a child where she cannot terminate her pregnancy because she lives in like a crazy restricted abortion state. That's a plot twist you were not seeing. You couldn't see that coming. So yeah, love the book, definitely would recommend it. Taylor Jenkins reads again. Oh, One True Loves. She knows how to write a conflicting love story. She was great. This book was really, really interesting because the main character, Emma, she marries the love of her life, Jesse. They're young, they're traveling around the world, they're living their best lives. They get married, and like shortly after they were married, he goes on this sort of adventure and just never returns. That's a plot twist. And it's about how her love is still a really strong love, but she has to move on. So she does. She finds someone else and falls in love with that person who has also been in her life for a really long time. Plot twist. Jesse comes back. So it becomes this issue of what would you do? What would you do? And you feel that conflict throughout that book. The inner conflict between this main character who still has a strong love for her first husband, but has a really wonderful, strong, equally as strong love for her new partner now. read it, you'll read it, and you'll blaze through this book because you want to know how she resolves this. And it's beautiful. It's a very, very beautiful story. So yeah, definitely would recommend this book. Let's clear the pipes. So when I want to like cleanse my brain, I read a lot of, I like corny romances. It's not always serious. As I said, it's not always about taste. Jenn McKinley's Paris is always a good idea. You know, if you are like a career girl, this is like Eat, Pray, Love, but in reverse. I liked it. It was fluffy, it was light. It really reminded me of like when I was younger and in Europe and like having fun. And also it goes back to that kind of what if concept. Basically, Chelsea Martin, she's one of those sort of stellar people who just kind of like overachieves and everything that she does. Her dad comes to her and says, you know what? I'm marrying this woman I just met a few weeks ago. And she's like livid about this. She's like, this is crazy. You don't know this woman. But she's more upset that she didn't find love in her life, especially after her mom died. So she decides to take like a sabbatical from her work and go on this like European adventure. And her boss is a really lovely person, and you find out some details that's going on, but she has a sort of nemesis at work. We're not even going to call him the antagonist. It's a nemesis, somebody that drives her nuts. But the boss is like, listen, I need you to work on this one project before you go. And even while you're away, you're going to work with Jason. His name was Jason. So she hates Jason. Jason's a pain in the bootay, and he just always like gives her a hard time. But they end up having to work on this project together while she's abroad. And so it's about her adventure of rediscovering like the past loves of her life and like going to the countries that they're in. So she goes to Ireland, she goes to France, and she goes to Italy. All the while still having to get this work done with this really major donor because she works for a nonprofit. It's a great story, and it makes you feel like, yeah, let's go. Let's travel the world. Let's try to figure it out. Let's find love. Let's be like intentional. It's very Logan Yuri and being intentional with how you approach your love life. Tell you, I read a lot last month. Oh, Lord of mercy, did I ever. Okay, let me see how many more books are left. Oof. Sally Rooney, Beautiful World, Where Are You? Yo, okay, you know what? If you read Normal People and that other Conversation, In Conversation, I think that's what it's called. I don't remember what her second book or the other book was. You don't need to read this. This is depressing as heck. It made me wonder if, well, I've been to Ireland and I've been to Dublin, Cork, and I toured throughout Ireland, and I thought that people had more depth than the way that Sally Rooney writes her characters. I was not impressed because everything is just so like blasé. You don't really get attached to any of these characters. You kind of all feel like they're super dysfunctional, just not nice people, or just vapid people. People that blow up and are so repressed they blow up and get upset with each other, but they don't actually say anything. They're always thinking about everything in their head. That feels very Sally Rooney to me. I didn't like it. I was bored by it. Yes, I don't have taste sometimes. I do, but sometimes I just don't want to read highbrow. Don't. I've read so many books, academia. I just want like fluffy. This one is literally called The ButterCream Bake Off by Jenn McKinley. Sorry. I read the first book, so I was like, you know what? I found out there were a lot in this series. This woman, Melanie Cooper, and her best friend, Angie, opened up a bakery, also with their other male best friend. What's his name? Matt? Something very American. First book, there's like this murder mystery that's got to be solved. So it's very, it's cheesy, but it's also well done. The second book, murder mystery continues. That's all I'm gonna say. You just feel like, okay, I can continue with this. There's nothing heavy about any of her books. They show friendship, they show love triangles within these friendships, and they have a lot of adjacent characters. They're lovely. Nobody's really horrible in this book, and in her books in general. So I definitely would recommend it as a read if you just want to like brain cleanse, you know? Can you see it? The sweet girl, Annabel Lyons, or Lyon. Yeah, Annabel ain't lying in this one. Pythias, this is, you find out later on, is Aristotle's daughter. It's about her journey through like a portion of her life shortly after Aristotle dies. So you do get to see her relationship with her father in the beginning of the book. And then he just starts making these really bad choices and ends up almost like killing himself. But he basically dies from like pneumonia, and everything goes into chaos afterwards. She is given a dowry so that when her husband, who's away at war, when he comes back, then she'll be fine. And she's also left all the servants in the house and like some things. But there was this cousin who was like super vengeful, and he steals all like her dowry, all the money. So she has nothing to pay anyone. So she basically has to like fend for herself, and she's a teenager, so she goes to like it's very Greek tragedy, but you realize that this girl who is supposed to be preserved and like a sweet child isn't so sweet. Definitely would recommend the read. If you like these type of books, read them. I give it a solid 3.5. I don't know if I would pay for it though. I read another Elizabeth Acevedo book, Poet X. It's a short read. It's intense. It's great. It's this coming of age story, a love story set in like New York, and really tight knit family. This girl, her name is Xiomara. In her heart, she's a poet. She's also a twin. She's got this really interesting relationship with her twin brother, who is coming into his own with his sexuality, but he's like a very gentle character. And so she takes on the world for him at times. She has a very tenuous, like terrible relationship. Well, she has a loving love-hate relationship with her mom. Her mom is extremely strict and attached to the church. And she's got like that typical kind of Caribbean dad. You have to have a Caribbean dad to know what I'm talking about, so I'm just gonna leave it there. So the mom has been through it and projects a lot of stuff onto her daughter. People are trying to like see her daughter thrive and blossom, Xiomara. Yeah, read this book. This book had me by the throat. She has a teacher who like inspires her to become a slam poet, and she performs once and she feels like she's alive. From there, so many other things, like the moment she finally discovers herself and her passion and her love, the amount of people that are around her that try to destroy that is interesting. So read this book. You will want to fight somebody when you're reading it. At some parts, you're just like, yo, okay, this, it's a great book. She's a wonderful writer. The Poet X, go for it. Hey, I did read a lot. You can see, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. This is Alice Oseman's Loveless. Please hold. Georgia and her friends are going to university for the first time. Her best friend, gosh, can't remember what her name is. She knows who she is. She's queer. She's stands in her sexuality, but Georgia is very, very confused because she doesn't really have a definition what her sexual orientation is. She doesn't know. And this book is written very much like a young girl is written, with lots of words and lots of like overthinking, and you really get the sense of like anxiety in her self-discovery. And she meets some really wonderful people through the Pride organization at her university, and they help her identify her sexual orientation. They help put words to it, and it's a great book about aromantic asexuality. It's the first time I've read it in a book. I know when I was younger, I would have loved to have read a book like this, because there are lots of questions that I grew up in a very open household, so I'm very lucky that sexuality was never a challenging topic to discuss in my household. So I know I grew up in a very different environment. I'm seeing that now as an adult to other folks. And so I think this book would even have expanded on that further. Would have been able to discuss it with my parents, and we would have had some really cool conversations about it, because they were those type of people. Like my dad pulled me aside when I was 12, maybe younger. And he said, don't have sex, masturbate instead. That's the kind of sex advice that I got from my parents. Like they were like, it's not worth it. It's not all it's cracked up to be. Learn to do that and learn to like do the other things later on, but start there. If you're a younger person or if you are somebody who doesn't know the scope of sexuality, this book was great because it identified that, and it really, it showed also some generational challenges as well. Great book. It's really written in the voice of a teen or a young, very young person. So that might annoy you, but the general message of figuring out your sexuality and that coming of age of figuring out your sexuality, it's a great book. Bolu Babalola's Love in Color. Girl. Bolu's book, this book was great. Took a lot of folk classic tales from different folklore, so not just from African folklore, but also Greek mythology, and made them like contemporary. Made them present day settings. So, and also twisted them around. So just basically taking some ideas of like traditional folklore characters, modern scenarios, and modern day jobs. But it's a series of like short stories. I did not put this book down. I kind of stayed up till like late in the night reading it, and I thoroughly enjoyed this. There's so many different stories and folklores that she just added this like warmth to it. Love this book. Last book that I read for January. M by Kim Thuy. This was a very short, it's almost like a short story, but there was so much information in the short story. But it was basically about multiple characters and the effects of the Vietnam War on these characters, the displacement, how the diaspora had to spread out, the interracial relationships with some of these diaspora members, the disconnection from certain families because a lot of people were left orphans, and there's so many heavy topics in this book, and it was hard for me to follow because it wasn't chronological. It was all over the place, and there were so many characters that you have to get to know in such a short span of time. But definitely would recommend it as a read. You realize even more what the effects of war has on society, and specifically you rarely hear that perspective from a Vietnamese writer, and really truly how that war destroyed their nation. Okay, so that's it. I think I've got about like 17 titles that I read this month, all very different books. I love to read. I'm going to continue reading, and I recommend that you download the Luvvie app. This is not a sponsored video, but if you're on a budget and you live in a city that has really good library program, highly recommend the Luvvie app. It's free. You get a lot of titles, and especially if you look in the audiobook section. This is why I have no friends. Yeah, xoxo. Great month of reading. I'll try this again. We'll see how this turns out in the edit. But thank you for joining me. This is Laney Loves Books. Let me make a new title. Laney Loves Books for January 2022. Okay. Happy reading. See you next month. Bye.